Okay, dear friends, it's time for Q&A. So what's on your mind? And do we have someone? Yeah, Cynthia, thank you. Passing around the microphone. We ask you to speak in the microphone. I see faces when people get the microphone. You might be shy with it, but think of it as an act of kindness for those who are streaming, because they cannot hear your question without that. So it's quite helpful to speak right into it. Okay, who would like to start?
I heard you speaking about the four immeasurables.
Yes.
And so, wow. So there was, what I heard was the nouns. And so I'm kind of a stickler, and would you be willing to say more about how we turn the noun into a verb, how we bring the verb of loving kindness, the verb of equanimity, the verb of joyful compassion, all of those things. Is there like a kind of, it's a slogan, yeah? There are slogans probably for each of those. Could we hear those, please?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a good one. It's kind of like, let's not hear it and put it on the shelf. To me, the verb is practice. The practice of loving kindness, the practice of equanimity, on and off the cushion. So for most of us, because we have these in our core being, our Buddha nature, but we're tangled up in samsaric thinking. So we're tangled up in our own aversion, our own attraction, our own obliviousness, all based on a false sense of a separate I, a separate me, separate I. I want this, and my want is more important than yours. So the practice of loving kindness, I don't relate to the word slogan so much, but I think it's a good one, because it's what you can carry with you all the time, something short. So loving kindness is simply, it's interesting about these immeasurables. They start with the wish. We can think a wish is so wispy, a wish. But if we mentally practice the wish over and over and over, it starts showing up in our speech, in our actions. So loving kindness is the wish for beings to have happiness. Not just worldly happiness. That's good to wish for, that everyone has shelter, food, clothing, medicine, friends, house, good job. That's really important. But the wish on another level that beings have meaningful spiritual practice, and the wish on other levels they totally realize their Buddha nature. That's the greatest happiness. But it's important to have the definitions of these. The wish that people have happiness, that's loving kindness. The compassion is like close but different. The wish that they be free from suffering. So they have different emphasis, free from every kind of suffering. Gross suffering, the suffering of grabbing at things that will not bring happiness, which we do all day. We do that all day. If we really observe ourselves, we see that we do this. And it's okay. It's where we're at. but we have to see it to change it. So freedom from all three kinds of suffering. The gross suffering of I stub my toe or I'm depressed. The suffering of change, it's called, which is to grab at something. This will bring me happiness. You can't have it. It's mine. It will bring me happiness, which guarantees, I mean, you're already suffering the minute you grasp. And the suffering of what's called the all-pervasive suffering, the suffering of just being in a body that's aging without our control, getting sick without our control, heading towards death, which most of us aren't looking forward to. And this is the situation for everyone, wishing them free of that suffering. That's the compassion. And the equanimity, I think I talked quite a bit about, this. We wish people to have this, but, these wishes are great, but we have to embody it and carry it into the world. So I can wish for you to have equanimity and live without bias, attachment, anger. But to help that happen, because of our interconnectedness, if I embody it, I don't ever have to say it. Now, how do you embody it? First, you get on your cushion and you think about these things. You feel them. You look at the teachings. So we study, we contemplate, we meditate. That's how we start getting it going. It's in there, but we get it going. And then we walk off the cushion and we can take little slogans like, oh, my slogan, just like me. That's a slogan you can carry around for equanimity in particular. Anytime I'm angry, I try to remember that one. I'm frustrated with someone. They didn't do it quick enough, or they didn't wash the dish again in the sink. Zopa, have you ever left a dirty dish in a sink? Oh my God. Yeah, just like me. So that can head to the equanimity. Then we have the sympathetic joy, which is really a contradiction to our jealousy. Now, it's so interesting. There are people who say, I'm not jealous. I'm not a jealous person. I wish everyone loving kindness. I do this. I do that. I'm good. I'm happy. I'm nice. I talk about myself. So if you're at that level, what I would say, a little more contemplation is needed, a little more insight into what your mind's actually doing during the day, a little less fear of finding maybe something that isn't so kind and nice and fair in your mind, and meeting that with equanimity, meeting the negative states of mind in ourselves with kindness, with loving kindness. We need to meet them in ourselves. How could we ever meet them in someone else if we can't do that? I've been working quite a bit this year on pride, and when I was at Sravasti Abbey for 5 years, oh my God, some of the best work was on pride. I've told the story about I showed up there having been a very successful legal aid lawyer, and also a very successful divorce mediator, a very successful executive director of a mediation agency, very successful in all the worldly things, very successful. And you get there and no one cares. And they don't even want to hear about it, and most of them don't hear about it. The abbess knows from your application, but there's no introduction of, here's Kathleen Heron, who has done, and here's her resume. No, you don't have a resume. And you sweep the floor, and you cook food, and you chop a lot of carrots, and no one cares. And it's tough, and it's perfect, because you see all of that rise. And you don't have to go to a monastery to see it rise. It's just like there, you get cooked a little quicker, hopefully. But, you see it rise and rise and rise. I, me, what What'd I go to law school for? They never ask me. Here's a legal question here. And they're not asking me. They're going and calling some lawyer in Spokane who probably doesn't even know how this works. You know? And because you're not there to be a lawyer anymore. You came there to unlawyer yourself or whatever, undoctor yourself. How'd I get there? Oh, the sympathetic joy. Yeah, it's a contradiction to the pride. And so in that pride, we're often quite jealous of others and their achievements. So sympathetic joy is the way out of that one. That's the fourth immeasurable. When you absolutely, yeah, and be very happy about it. And first we have to fake it sometimes, but it's really important to see the jealousy. Oh yeah, I see it. And then you work to change it gently, kindly, with compassion for yourself. And to see, this was a key thing a teacher told me, because I had trouble with this one, to see their happiness actually is your happiness. And the silly thing about jealousy goes like this. I want everyone to be happy and joyful in the world, and then someone does something good, and I'm like, they're getting praise, and I'm not, you know. Or, I wish I had thought of that. You know, all those little squirrely things that happen. Just see it. We're pretty much all like that. If you've overcome it, great, but most of us haven't. And instead, feeling the joy. So after the teacher taught me that, I had this instant, which often happens, pretty quick test out in the world. I went into a restaurant, and I was by myself, and that's a real thing to do even by itself. And then especially for a woman, and especially for a woman with gray hair or whatever. And a person in, you know, that isn't always given the front row or noticed right away or whatever just because of your appearance. And a couple came in simultaneously with me, younger, better dressed, all that stuff, and kind of bubbly. But we came in the door together, and the maitre d' just totally didn't see me. I mean, even I'm standing there, and seated them at the last table that was available. And I stood there just being so PO'd and going through my whole litany. And then I remembered this practice. I think actually it was a teaching from Lama Michael that was coming into my mind at that moment. And I thought, okay, I'm going to notice their happiness, and I'm going to see if I can connect to it instead of this jealousy. So it was a real stretch, and I was faking it. But at some point, all my disturbance went down. It was like, oh, who cares? They are happy. So I have to wait 10 minutes. Big deal. You know, would I rather wait 10 minutes angry? Who's suffering off that? Not them. They're all fine. They didn't even notice. Who suffers if I stay angry and jealous? I'm the first casualty. So I just kept looking and seeing them being happy. Then imagine them being my son and his wife or whoever, my friends. And then it's like, oh yeah, I do feel good. They got a nice place to sit and they're happy, and I can be happy about it. I can be happy about it. So this is what the immeasurables do on one level. Also, the immeasurables can lead us into, because the level they're working on is interconnectedness, okay? That's like rubbing the two sticks together. I'm interconnected with them, so their joy is my joy. And as you rub it and rub it, it can flame up into there's no difference. Me, them. They're sitting at their table and they would look over and say, her over there. I would never say her over there. This is me here. But their label's just as valid. Just labels, causes, conditions, thoughts. So we just get so tangled. But thank you for that question. And I don't know your name. Karma Sandru. Oh. Samdru. Hi. Hi. Welcome. Thank you.
Zopa, a few of us are going to start a class soon at Heart of Wisdom. It's called Waking Up to Whiteness, or something to that effect. And it has to do with trying to dismantle racism, particularly that which is in our own minds, and that we may not even see it. And I've been wondering, I know that this has been important work that you've done over many years. So I guess one question is how you work with this in your practice, with the idea of whether there is something that we're blind to that relates to our privilege. And also if you see anything that, I don't know, for KCC institutionally, is there something that that we could be doing that's moving in that direction of greater awareness around those issues?
Well, that's a pretty big question. And thank you. So, first of all, we need to talk about it more. So I'm glad you brought it up. I worked on a multicultural training team for 20 years in Portland with an African-American trainer friend and a Latina trainer friend called Tools for Diversity from about 89 to 2009. So we learned a lot. That work sprung out of a murder of an Ethiopian man by white skinheads about 3 blocks from where I was living in Southeast Portland. I was a lawyer at the time. One thing I'll say is that this equanimity piece is crucial. So I'm starting to design a workshop or a teaching series for this next year called Equanimity and Diversity, although I'm massaging the title. And I was talking with the other teachers, and Lama Michael brought up a very interesting part to it of, we think of the outside diversity, all the isms, classism, sexism, ableism, racism, all the isms, right? And he was reflecting equanimity toward the diversity of our reactions. So this fits very nicely with calm abiding. So if I say the word racism, you can look immediately and see your reactions. And if you meet them with equanimity, then we don't do the thing of, I should have this reaction, so I will have that. I am a good white person who is not prejudiced and not racist. I treat everyone the same, and I don't even see color. Which could be a problem, not seeing, but that's one of the reactions we have. There's many reactions. So we need to start having equanimity toward our own reaction. Equanimity is kind of, I mentioned it this morning, it brings an openness, and that openness brings an honesty. So we used to work with that. We worked in mixed race and mixed gender groups. We worked on homophobia with people. And we learned so much. We came at it out of very activist, kind of leftist, social, good ideas, but a little rigidity perhaps, and a little judgment. And we were taught by many people how that didn't work. We were taught the goodness of it and what it didn't do. So I'm very excited about this idea of us approaching this through the tools we have, through the four immeasurables, through calm abiding, through Shine, through that. Shine is about being honest, darn it, about what's in there and going deeper and deeper and meeting it with full out compassion. And so as I said today, you will meet in yourself pretty much everything that's out that appears in the external world. Your own prejudice, your own confusion, your own fear, your own joy about it, your own love of diversity or fear of diversity. We used to start with people talking about where did they grow up and who was other in that setting. Just forget the isms. Forget all the isms. Who was othered? Othered as a verb. Othered. They were made other by things your parents said, or they were other because they didn't show up at your school, in your parties, etc. I grew up in north central Montana, very close to the Rocky Boy Indian Reservation, and othering was very big about Native Americans. And it affected me all my life, because when someone's othered, it's easy to other many groups because you've got the pattern of othering. You know, they are not us. Whether your parents say they're terrible or good, they're just not us, okay? So there's the suffering always in Buddhism. The minute there's a self and an other, Buddha talked about all this stuff. Self and other, suffering. Equanimity leads to, as I pointed out in that little restaurant vignette, no other. They're joyful. I can be joyful. They feel discriminated against. I can understand that. Do I ever feel that on some level because of my socially ascribed groups? Even the richest, white, straightest man, I don't know what else we could say, put him in all those isms. Put the person in all those rich, straight, white, man, able-bodied, on and on. That person suffers, and suffers from those very societal ascribing. What we learned was that people who are more toward the top of the heap, shall we say, economically or however, let's say society somehow favors them. We can see that and look at Congress. Mostly millionaires, mostly white, mostly straight, mostly male. We can see certain institutional patterns. Those people suffer too. And we are like them, and they are like us. But that doesn't mean there is different kind of suffering that has to be acknowledged. So yeah, we have things, every institution, every household, every person in this country needs to grapple with this. And we are, whether you want to or not, even if you're grappling with it by, I don't want to go there, I don't want to think about it. That's a grappling. Because we have a certain history in this country, we have certain isms that have been carried forth, and they show up in policies and problems. And we also have a struggle since about the 60s, maybe. I used to teach a class in racism and the law, so it's a fascinating thing looking from the 60s forward in the US. But we have a history of then trying to change it. The civil rights movement, the Supreme Court decisions to integrate schools, which, by the way, are more segregated now statistically than they were before that 1954 decision, which can be shocking for people to hear. But they are more statistically segregated in the country now than before that integration decision. So the struggles in the courts, the struggles on the streets, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, all of that. And then up to the 80s, a sense of we're going to do this through a diversity prism and some of that, but still carrying too much us and other. Now the other is some targeted, white, straight, rich, able-bodied male. Well, that ain't going to work either. You know why? Because that person's in all of us too. That person's way of being. So Gandhi knew this. Martin Luther King knew this. Folks that have made the largest gains came from a spiritual base, the largest gains in the whole world. Nelson Mandela knew this. How did he know it? He learned to love his straight, white, male, racist guards on Robben Island off the coast of South Africa as he was in prison for 27 years. He learned to love them. So when he came out and became the president of South Africa, he could not go the revenge way, even he was the most powerful person. Instead, he worked with Archbishop Tutu and set up the Reconciliation Commission. How do we reconcile and heal this? So those are just some of my thoughts, and I'm pretty excited about starting to think about bringing what I did with those years into the whole how do I want to say, enlightening it. Yeah, enlightening that work with the Buddhist teachings and with our practices of the four immeasurables, the six perfections, the selflessness, the shine. So thanks for asking. But I mean, it's just so huge. So we'll be doing things and you'll be doing things. And it seems like a lot of Buddhist centers are kind of heading that way. Tricycle Magazine has some amazing things online by teachers of color who are talking about this kind of path with it. And you know, white people, we can function as fully awakened beings with this and help heal this. So we have a very important part to play. With total respect to the people who are targeted by these things and who will need to help us do it without us taking over. Yeah, that's tricky. So when I first started out doing the anti-racism workshops, I was leading it myself. And I'll never forget this wonderful, very strong Black woman who was a known activist and very honored. And she just came up to me very bluntly one day and said, "You need to do this with a team of people of color. You're doing a good job, but you need to do that." And I took it seriously and went out looking and found my dear friend who was also, he was a paralegal close to the office I was working at, African American, and things straightened around with the three of us. So anyway, we'll see. We'll be doing it. Everybody has to do it. I'm so glad Heart of Wisdom's kicking it off. Maya Tripa's looking at some ways in. Yeah. Okay. Anything to add? Or? Yeah, Mary.
There's a really good book that I read last year called Radical Dharma that's written by 3 African American Buddhists, 2 women and a man. I believe they're all gay. And it was an eye-opening book to read and made me confront some stuff within myself, like what's that look like? It was... So anyway, if you're grappling with this, like we all should be or might be, that's a really good place to start. And actually, she's going to be here next weekend, Angela Kyoto Williams, and teaching at the Sola School, which is, I don't know if it's actually a building or just an organization. That I think Peter Wood had shared that online, I believe. Anyway, so I'm off the wait list and I get to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's been a great book, Radical Dharma.
Yeah, and you can put those kind of informations onto the KCC list if you mark it not a KCC event, so that people can capture what you said. And maybe the bookstore wants to talk to Mary about looking at some copies of that book. Others? Well, I'll say some more then. We had a 40-hour workshop on this. We trained leaders in the community in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was financed by the county, which was interesting. So I won't say 40 hours worth, but just the first thing, because by looking at us, and you can never tell that always by just appearance, but we look mostly like European American descent white people. And so one of the first things we have to grapple with is guilt. And one of the main things is to pretty quickly see how that is not helpful. It is quite self-centered. So make an example of that. If you hurt me, let's say, you run over my foot, and your first reaction is you feel so guilty about it. That is not connecting to me or my pain. You see that? It can take a while to sort regret from guilt. One of the practices we have in our purification practices in this lineage is to regret the harm you've caused in the past to anyone with your body, speech, and mind. Regret is not guilt. This is so hard for me to get. I'll never forget when I asked my teachers, well, then what's regret? I mean, I grew up fundamental Catholic, so GUILT, big letters, glowing always. But regret is simply this, it's so interesting, tied to equanimity. It's this open, honest statement. I did that. I did that. Whatever it is. You spilled the milk. I did that. That's so different from what we mostly do. I didn't do that. I didn't mean to. I'll get rid of it before anyone sees. All these things are going into some kind of fear spiral, But just seeing that guilt is not helpful. It's a symptom of the self-centered mind. It spins around I. Regret is more towards the ethical, open side. I did that. Then to follow it with resolve. I intend not to do that again. Then, you do some kind of remedy. 12-step knows this, Everybody knows there's some remedy. It can be a face-to-face apology. Sometimes that's not appropriate. Sometimes it could be a prayer for the one you harmed. Sometimes you give them money. Sometimes you have to figure out the skillful means, but a remedy. Then you take refuge, of course. That's always in your own good nature. We only act that way out of our confusion, our ways we've been harmed. So almost a kind of self-compassion, forgiveness. Taking refuge in our own good nature. Had I known, I never would have done that. But I didn't know. So then that opens us to be a learner. Yeah, Cynthia.
I have confusion and suffering on one aspect of a big aspect of this, and that is I can be assuming the other is hurt. I can be assuming what the hurt is. But if I'd like to actually know from them if they're hurt and how, I'm stuck on how to ask or show that I'm open to hear without feeling like being invasive. Or
Yeah.
so
Yeah, good
how-
you see that.
how
Good you
to
see
get,
that.
but how to hear without just being more of my side, how I think that they're hurt.
Well, there's tons of resources without approaching a person to educate you. So your question came up over and over in our workshops. People of color, it's surprising how many of them get approached by well-meaning, well-intentioned, let's use race for a minute, but we could say sexism or homophobia. They often find themselves constantly training, being asked, and they don't want to go around the world doing that. They want to just have their lives like anyone else. So the way they've explained to me for racism is first they suffer from the racism, then they suffer from the nice people who want them to talk about their experience, and they didn't decide in that cocktail party or whatever that that's what they came for. So one of the things I do, well, Mary just gave us a resource. There's tons of stuff coming out on Tricycle Magazine online right now. There's I read novels by people of color from all over the world. I just finished one by a man from Pakistan. It's so helpful because in novels, they're at the very personal level, but they're really unfolding their experience. So you can do that if you like novels. And there's TED Talks galore on race and diversity. So I think we need to, whatever ism we don't know about, it's good to educate ourselves in that less direct way. Then if you have a natural friendship with someone from that group, ask them if it's okay to sit and talk with you about that specific thing. And set aside time, and they may say, and be ready for a big fat no. And then you deal with equanimity with your reaction, So we do need to, we can take on and really enjoy educating ourselves about it. Not this big, heavy, I'm bad thing. I want to look at how bad I am. That will not help. So approaching this with some joy and space is really helpful to everyone. Yeah. And creatively. Wait, Peter, then Mary.
It gets into
I just want
racism.
to add one thing
wait,
there.
Bill.
And if you do have an opportunity to talk to somebody, remember that you're talking to somebody, not a representative.
Yes, so important.
Because it's very interesting to hear the wide range of possibilities that will come in conversation.
Yeah.
We had experience back in the 80s when the KCC neighborhood was not predominantly African American, but much more so than today. And all kinds of things were going on, and we actually had to get to know our neighbors for very practical reasons. And in that, finding out the great variety of people and reactions and theories, including I remember one guy just said to me, "Don't let anybody tell you this." And it's kind of like, don't let anybody browbeat you into, sucking up and just accepting the situation as it is.
Yeah, because you're quote a racist.
Yeah.
And therefore, not holding people to good ethics or whatever. Like, you get robbed by someone who happens to be African American. There's many things that can happen out of that. All African Americans are violent and da-da-da. Our minds can go there. But Also, you can talk to a person who says, I don't ever experience prejudice, and they're in that group. That's their experience. So we have to be very careful, and that's an important caveat. Yeah, we're learners. Be a learner. Yeah.
It gets into racism, but I think the prejudice that I'm aware of is that I separate myself from people that I can't communicate with.
Like deaf or
No,
like...
people who don't speak English or don't speak it clearly and well.
Yeah, yeah,
And
sure.
I'm not at all sure how to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, me either. But what I do is I try and learn, my friend from Singapore says, learn how to say hello, learn how to say thank you, and learn how to say goodbye in their language, and they'll be delighted, because even that doesn't happen for them. And when you just do it, you know, muchas gracias, how hard is that? And, you know, there's a connection. So, and we also communicate 70% by all the tests say, it's not the words that come out. Are you smiling? Are you doing eye contact? Are you having an open space toward them? People feel that. I went to Mexico. We don't have much time for stories, but I love stories. I was really gonna get my Spanish down. I was in this little town, and I wanted to barbecue a fish that night. And I practiced going into the fish store. There was a little fish store, and there was a guy, and saying, I want a fish to barbecue. So I practiced, and I went in. We were the only two in there. And I did my very good Spanish. And then he looked at me, and he cracked up. He just laughed and laughed. And in very good English, he looked Mexican, he was. In very good English, he said, do you know what you just said? And I said, well, I think I said, I want a fish to barbecue. And he said, no, you said, I want to barbecue a fisherman. And I loved it. I loved it. You know, it was like just the effort. I made some effort towards it, and we were instantly connected, you know. So we can connect, you know, through humor. We can connect saying, you can be humble and just look at the person and say, I'm sorry, I don't know Spanish, but hello, bienvenidos. How hard is that? I just told you my 3 Spanish words. Muchas gracias, bienvenidos. You're welcome here. That's plenty. My Singaporean friend goes around the world, and she just, every country, she learns hello, goodbye, thank you, you're welcome. 4 things. She has wonderful conversations in many languages. So, Mary.
And the other thing I've been reminding myself of is, because like many people I know, I was upset with what things happened a year ago, and you know, dealing with that. But I had the opportunity of being around a lot of people in the not so distant past that think very differently than me.
Yeah.
And rather than engaging them in a way that would be argumentative, just treated them just like they were my family, you know. And I tried not to judge. I mean, I'm sure I did, but I didn't, say anything out loud. And just all the things we had in common, like, they had nice kids, and they were generous, and they were, friendly, and had fun, and liked pretty things, just all the things that I think. So I've been trying to, with that, instead of looking at how I'm different, like how we're different, it's like, how are we the same?
Yeah.
And I guess, and just, it's really easy to go to the places where I could argue with them, but it's just not been helpful.
Yeah. It's skillful means. And the Buddha and the Dalai Lama, everybody, all the teachers, they say, we are so same. We're humans on this earth. We're all gonna die. We're all suffering, and we're the most same, and we want happiness, the deepest kind of happiness. And the other way, we're very the same. We don't know how to get it we go down wrong trails over and over, so we can have a lot of empathy for others, because that's us. How many times have I gone down the wrong trail to be happy? Well, if they're going down the wrong trail to be happy, do I want to beat them up for it? Kind of, but but it's not helpful. And so it's equanimity again. How am I like that? And through that equanimity, through that seeing no self, no other, see, I share in the ignorance, I share in the pain, I share in that, then we can influence. It's influence just by the way we are, just by the way we are. It's not that we have to have an argument. It's taken me so long to learn that. So may we all learn that, and I think we're at the end. Thank you.
Ooh, by this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good week.